I know we're missing some of our usual suspects. Ben, where's that photo from?
This is Horseshoe Lake last year, I believe. Now it's like covered in snow and full of water. Horseshoe Lake in part of the Mammoth Lakes. And then that's the Mammoth crest behind me, and you can see that this was a good drought indicator photo.
Yes.
But now there's probably 40 feet of snow on it.
Yeah, the bloom in the lower eastern Sierras, I think, is really good right now from the photos I've been seeing. All right, well, let's go ahead and remind everybody what we're here to do together today. I'm sure more folks will be joining us. Oh, here comes Patricia. So welcome back. This is actually our 20th meeting of the National Tribal Resilience Data Workgroup. And as you might have noticed, we've gone to bi-monthly, and for some reason, it's not enough now. We have so many really cool things to hear about. And so we have a packed meeting today. We're going to go ahead and make our way through it. As always, our purpose to get together is to connect national health and climate data experts, and we like to exchange knowledge, share tools, practices, ideas, lessons learned, and explore opportunities to develop or scale up solutions. And today, what I like to do is invite everybody to introduce yourself first over chat. If you just give us your name, organization, and location, that would be wonderful. And if you want to tell us what beautiful spring thing is happening to you in whatever neck of the woods you are in. I'm enjoying snow melt in the creeks, personally. And then I wondered if, let's see, we usually like to say hello to anybody brand new. And I think there was Colleen who is brand new. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think I attended not last month's, but last meeting. But I'm happy to reintroduce myself. My name is Colleen Bodenreiter. I use they them pronouns with the Public Health Alliance of Southern California, and I am a data analyst there.
Perfect. That's right. Now I recognize your face. Thank you. Okay, and everybody else, you can introduce yourself over chat. We do have some speakers I'll introduce in just a moment here. We have, first we're going to hear from Lori Carrie Cathera. She is joining us from the White House's Council on Environmental Quality. We're so excited to have her. She's been part of this group before and is on detail from NOAA. She's going to talk to us about some of the things that tribes can take advantage of coming out of the federal government when it comes to data, climate resilience and data. Same kind of presentation, but we're also going to hear from the state of California. So Patricia Kennedy and her friends at the Office of Planning and Research in California here are going to share what's going on at the state level there. A lot of happening in terms of tribal climate resilience and data efforts. So that's today. First, though, let's do a quick round of member announcements. And we actually have one group that's going to kick us off here with a brief announcement on an important tool. And so I wanted to invite Laura and Walker to share from OEHA one of their new tools.
Okay, thanks so much, Angie. And hey, everyone, it's great to be with you. And I'm Walker Wieland, a research scientist with OEHA, part of the California Environmental Protection Agency. Just wanted to quickly mention that our office is developing a new tool, and it's called the Community Wildfire Vulnerability Tool. And this tool examines at a community scale or at the census block group geography across California, people's vulnerability to wildfire. And that's defined by a combination of wildfire hazard, so the likelihood of wildfire occurring in any given area, and also people's adaptive capacity or ability to prepare for, respond to, or recover from the effects of wildfire. So this tool combines all of those data together in a geographic mapping tool that ranks communities relative to one another so that state agencies and other entities can view on a relative scale what are some communities throughout the state that are relatively more or less vulnerable to the effects of wildfire. So we're planning to launch this tool very soon. And if any of this resonates with any of you, if you'd like to learn more about it, or if you'd like to be involved with the public process in any way, I'd really love to chat with you. After we launch the tool, we'll have a series of workshops over the next 2 months throughout California. And also there will be plenty of opportunities for other in-person meetings or virtual meetings. So I think Laura's helping me drop the email in the chat, and I'll stop there to give room for these great presentations today. But nice to meet you all, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, Walker and Laura. Really appreciate you being here. And in fact, we're about due to get our flyer out for a California webinar that Tribal Climate Health Project is going to be offering, where Walker and Laura are going to be joining us and giving us a full demo and doing some feedback, getting some feedback on their tools. So that's actually going to be June 7th at, what did we say, 9 to 10:30. And so when that flyer and registration are available, I'll make sure everybody on this list gets access to it as well. Feel free to join that conversation. I think it'll be good. It's directed, targeting mainly tribes, but partner organizations are welcome. And then my last update is just, we also have a summit, our next annual summit coming up, and more information will be coming soon, but it's November 8th and 9th, and we're going to be focusing on a theme of centering on health, planning, implementing, and evaluating tribal adaptation strategies that safeguard health. So flyer and registration coming soon. You all will get access to that as well. And we'll be looking for speakers again. Let's see, I'm going to invite folks to drop other member announcements for now in the chat. And I know Isabel wants to share something with us towards the end of the meeting. Hopefully we have a few extra minutes for additional announcements then. But anybody else that would like to share something, please drop it in the chat for now. Hopefully we'll get to it at the end. Okay, so with that, I'm really, really pleased and honored to welcome Lori to join us today from the White House Council on Environmental Quality. So Lori, thanks for being here, and we're just really looking forward to hearing what you all have in store for data and climate work for tribes.
Thanks, Angie. Well, I really appreciate the invitation to come. And I thought maybe what I could do is just give you a little bit of a high-level overview of sort of the position I have and the work that we're doing with the federal agencies on climate adaptation, and then some connections that we've been trying to make to the tribes. I don't have a slide, so hopefully can be very animated as I kind of give you this overview about what we're working on. So my title is the Director for Climate Adaptation and Resilience, and my position is actually within the Sustainability Office, which is located within CEQ, the Council of Environmental Quality. And so the portfolio is very focused on federal operations and the federal programs. So that's kind of just wanted to kind of set the stage for you and a little bit of the overview and how I'm going to provide the overview for you guys. So as you all know, the United States is seeing a substantial increase in the number and types of disasters that we're seeing. Everything from not enough water to too much water to really intense storms and fires. Additionally, the costs of these disasters are increasing. You probably have all seen the NOAA chart on the billion-dollar disasters, and that the projection of these events is just kind of jumping off the scale right now in terms of cost and damage. So one of the things that the administration is doing is really bringing climate adaptation planning to the core of its government's plans for federal climate action. Through Executive Order 14008 and Executive Order 14057, has created the Federal Sustainability Plan. That plan focuses a lot on climate mitigation. So it has things like supply disclosures for buying clean products, carbon-free products, putting electric vehicles on the road, reducing carbon emissions, bringing in carbon-free electricity, and reducing building emissions by 2032. Within all of those mitigation elements is the element that I lead, which is the climate resilient federal operations. And that's kind of, it's not necessarily a new area that the government is focusing on, but it's been revitalized, re-energized over the past few years. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of a context in terms of the history, the federal agencies began thinking about climate adaptation back in 2012. And at that time, they were asked to develop their very first climate vulnerability assessments. Then a year later, they were asked to put together climate adaptation plans. And then 3 years after that, in 2016, they were asked to conduct a self-evaluation on their progress. Then things were kind of quiet for 4 years. And then in 2021, Biden re-energized the federal climate adaptation planning effort, which we're talking about today. So through the executive order, particularly 14008, that's really called out for the agencies to focus on their climate vulnerability plans and to address their vulnerabilities. So 23 agencies have developed those plans, and they're all publicly available on sustainability.gov/adaptation. Initially, we took a pretty simple approach when we were developing those plans, and we had kind of three core components for the agencies to focus on. First was we allowed them to identify sort of their top 5 priorities for climate action. And then we wanted them to update their climate vulnerability assessments and share their plans to ensure their facilities, supply chains, and services were climate ready. And then there was also a huge call to action to make sure that the workforce was educated and climate ready, climate literate, particularly on climate adaptation. Just kind of give you a little bit of a flavor about what some of the plans focused on. There were a number of the agencies were considering their climate adaptation and their building designs and their budget planning. We have officially appointed climate adaptation officials within the agencies, really heard how important it was to have strong leadership, particularly from the top, that can help shepherd this throughout the agencies and expand the reach across the federal government. There's also quite a bit of work on developing more resilient supply chains between the hurricanes and the wildfires, and it became very clear that figuring out alternative supply paths and figuring out how to connect with flexible vendors was a critical part of keeping those supply chains resilient. And then there was also quite a bit of focus on thinking about how we can protect our workers and the communities, particularly around extreme weather protocols. And thinking through how to make sure that we're protecting a workforce that is outdoors. Some of the tasks that folks were working on kind of through this program, the Department of Defense has evaluated all of its installations. I think that's nearly 2,000 installations to really have a comprehensive understanding of climate threats that could impact climate operations and national security. GSA has incorporated climate risk requirements into several major solicitations that they have, totaling over more than $400 million. And some of the agencies actually had their bureaus develop additional detailed climate adaptation plans. And so in particular, the USDA, EPA, and the Department of Interior have additional detail to their plans. And then one of the really cool programs that was just launched to help build brighter future leaders was through the Department of Homeland Security. They launched a Climate Adaptation Fellows program to help them embed new expertise into agencies to help agencies really hone their adaptation and resiliency expertise across their programs and within their buildings. So as you guys kind of have a sense, the federal government is pretty large, working with 23 agencies. It's a big task. And one of the things that we noticed as we were starting this program and working through these plans was that there had been a little bit of a gap in the community aspect. And so we've launched what we call the Federal Climate Adaptation Planning Network. We call it FCAP Network. And it's really a different kind of interagency working group, but more of a community practice, much like this group, to really help build knowledge and expertise. Some of the agencies during the last administration were forced to lay off a lot of their climate experts. They were asked to decrease that staff. And so there's really like a knowledge lack and a gap there. And so this network is really established to help reestablish those connections, help make sure that the community is sharing knowledge, aware of resources, and really helping to build a coalition among adaptation leaders within the federal government. And we've also starting to establish some training. I have a link that I can send Angie after the call about particularly about a climate adaptation training and training resources that we developed in conjunction with GSA and the Office of Management and Budget for acquisition managers, and it tells them, gives them some basic one-on-one climate literacy information, but then also kind of why it's important and specifically for acquisition managers. So where we are right now is we are focused on continuing to expand our training holdings. We're working on updating our guidance and hope to be able to roll out some new instructions to sort of jumpstart even further the climate adaptation efforts across the federal agencies. We're working on creating some metrics so that we can measure the progress. That's one of the challenges that we have right now, is that the agencies are very different in their size, focus, mission, and approach. And so how we can really show that we're making progress and that we're moving the needle on adaptation is a big challenge, as probably everyone on this call is aware of. And then we're going to continue to focus but growing the community of practice that we have within the FCAP network. So that's a lot. That's pretty high level, pretty broad overview of what's happening at the federal space. And I know Angie is particularly interested in making that tribal connection. So to kind of tell you a little bit about a project that we did, we partnered up with the White House Council on Native American Affairs. They have a climate adaptation subcommittee. And through that effort, we were able to sort of pool some interns last summer who did a bit of an analysis on the CAPS plans to see how tribes were included in those plans. And so it was CEQ and EPA, and then also the Advisory History Council on Historic Preservation, so ACHP, were the three agencies that put together this rock star group of interns that were able to do some analysis for us. And so really what we were trying to do is help in particularly the White House Council on Native American Affairs, really help that subcommittee understand how tribal concerns were included in the federal climate adaptation framework, and kind of help also. They were at that particular junction, they were getting ready to kick off their year-long webinar series, so helping to figure out how we could include some of the initiatives that could be informative and educational for the agencies and their employees, and then trying to help make sure that we provided some best practices for including tribal nations in ongoing and future work. So just to kind of give you a nutshell, what they did was sort of a 4-step process. They looked at the CAP plans and looked for key terms to identify, key questions to consider. They reviewed all of the 26 plans that were published, did a data analysis, and then provided a summary for us. How they developed their key terms, they really looked at ACHP and how they are defining terms. So thinking about historic property, sacred site, indigenous traditional knowledge, and how they're thinking about other indigenous populations. And through that, they used those words, they looked at all of the plans, and it's probably not a big surprise, but the agencies that had most reference to tribes in the CAPS were the Department of Interior, where the Bureau of Internal Indian Affairs is located, and also EPA, which also has a tribal program as well. The other agencies had mentions to some lesser degree, but those two agencies were the ones that were the most inclusive. So let's see, I'm just going through my notes here a little bit. They got curious. It was a really smart group of interns, and they got curious. So the initial task was to look at the CAPS, but they took it a step further and went and looked at actually all of those agencies' strategic plans. And what they found was that within most of the agencies included some mention of tribal connections within their strategic plans. And then there were only actually 2 agencies that did not mention them at all. So from that, they were really using, really trying to think about how we could move forward and look at this information and make some steps forward. So they kind of made some recommendations specifically for the webinar series, which I think we're about halfway through that series that they already developed. And kind of thinking about, they provided some recommendations for some things that we could consider as we're thinking about CAPS in the future. We were able to incorporate some of this information, and we, during the progress reports that we put out in last summer, we did have a couple of questions specifically about how the agencies are engaged with tribal nations, and they got pretty comprehensive information. So a nice base layer, a good sort of base framework for which we can move forward with. So I think it's kind of in a nutshell of sort of like the overview of what we've been doing with the federal agencies and how we're trying to connect those agencies to consider tribal information. I think it's been a really, for me at least, it's been a really informative learning process. We've had a number of amazing speakers come and talk to the FCAP network. I'm really trying to build awareness to the agencies that they should be considering the tribes, particularly in their climate adaptation work, and where they can make those connections. I think the next big jump, we're not quite there yet, that was really kind of thinking about how we're going to be able to start to incorporate tribal data, tribal knowledge, tribal information, specifically how we can direct the agencies to include that as they move forward. So that's definitely something under consideration. So with that, I'll just take a pause, and hopefully that was somewhat helpful to this group. You can hear what we have planned up with the agencies, and happy to take any questions. With the caveat that I'm on a White House Zoom, and so I don't have any access to the chat. So if there's any questions in there, you'll have to read them to me, Angie.
All right, thank you, Lori. Great overview. I feel like we could probably talk for a long time. I want to leave it open for questions. Walker.
Hey, thanks, Lori. Appreciate it. Just curious to hear from you how your work interfaces with the CEQ's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and if you could talk a little bit about either and/or challenges and/or efforts you or your colleagues might be involved in to better represent tribal data in that tool. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you a little bit, and then probably would want to connect you with the team that's actually responsible for developing that tool to ask you. They could drill down with that a little bit better. So the CJS tool has been, so there's sort of 2 ways that we're intersecting with that. We've made sure that all the agencies are aware that that tool has existed. We're getting ready to do some training around it in the near future. The data from that tool has also been incorporated into the camera tool that NOAA and the White House released this fall, and I'm trying to remember what camera. It's like the climate, I'll have to look it up. Climate, I can't remember what M stands for. But that tool has been really useful for the agencies. It was designed, camera was designed so that if agencies are moving forward, particularly with their bill funding or their IRA money and doing new infrastructure projects, they could go in and they could look at the site that they're interested in putting that project in and get a very quick high-level screening overview of 5 climate hazards. It also has tribal boundaries in there, as well as all of the data from CJS. And I think there's one other factor, and you can look at it by census or county. So the tool is a resource for the agencies to use as they're planning and implementing their adaptation plans. In terms of your question about incorporating more tribal information into that, I am not sure. I know that CEQ did get some funding this past year to update their data. I'm not exactly sure what those plans are. There's a whole team at CEQ that's working on that. They're doing amazing work, and I'm happy to connect you with them, and they could really give you a true deep dive on that particular application.
Thank you.
Lori.
Hey, thank you for that, Lori, and I love your name. I wanted to know, as you're planning to incorporate tribal knowledge and tribal data, are you working on plans to preserve that knowledge and make sure that it doesn't end up in the wrong places?
Yeah, that's I think in terms for my program, what we're doing is making sure that agencies are interfacing with the tribal nations, making sure that they're reaching out as they're implementing new plans. And so I'm sort of at the first stop of making sure that those connections are in place. There are others within the White House that are doing that. So the Office of Science, Technology, and Planning, OSTP, has a huge initiative on working on tribal knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and addressing all of those issues that you have mentioned, Lori. I'm not quite as familiar with their work, but they did put a webinar out I think it might have been in the fall, where they introduced the topic. They introduced the best practices of how to engage with the tribes, and then and begin to start to address some of those. So I think there's still, a lot of this work happening at the White House. It's pretty at the federal level. It's pretty new, and they're still working through protocols and all of those issues. I know that my home office, I'm detailed from NOAA, and I know that my home office has been very involved in working with BIA to try to make sure that we're providing data in a responsible way that protects the heritage, but that also provides access to those and information about those resources, and make sure it considers tribal components.
I was glad that came up. Our group usually talks about data that tribes have that could be incorporated into state or federal or local adaptation decisions, and being sensitive with that data, and also then the other way around, so accessing data. So my question for you would be, there's so much data that went into these federal adaptation plans. I would love to be a fly on the wall, but I'm sure there was a lot of efforts to share data across agencies, and maybe there was some epiphanies about standardization of data, or just where the data gaps were. And I'm imagining that has spillover advantages for all communities, including tribes. So just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, was there any data access gained that could be downscaled to communities?
I definitely think that there is. One of the things that we're trying to do is put, we're hoping that we can put a little bit more consistency on pointing agencies to be using the same base level information. Right now, there isn't a standard per se. And so when folks were asked to do the risk assessment, they weren't directed to use particular data sets. And so, as you can imagine, there's some of the agencies that are super data savvy and have really robust systems, and other agencies, they don't have that capacity at all. So we're trying to find a balance and work with them. We did partner up with the US GCRP this past winter, and they just put out a document. It's a very long titled document, but essentially what it does is it provides guidance on how to use downscale climate information. And then it has a table at the end of the document. So it gives you a really great detailed overview of the different climate scenarios and why you would pick or not pick one or the other. And then it talks, it took a pretty robust overview of all the federal tools that are available right now, and gave you a table that talks about the topic that they're focused on, the data that they use, and the climate scenario or information that's included in that tool, so that you can use that, get a little bit more information when you're deciding which tool to use, if you're trying to pick one for a particular analysis or not. So that just got rolled out at the end of February, early March, and I'll be happy to send that link to you, Angie, if you think
Yeah.
that's helpful.
It would be, yeah, I mean, that would be such a nice policy directive to say, if you're a federal agency dealing with this data, while you're at it, could you downscale it and make sure you're using tribal boundaries?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, so let's stay in touch, Lori. I know you have another thing to be at right now. I also wanted to, maybe I can, if you aren't already introduced, I know that federal government's often working on a lot of the same stuff that California is, and just with our politics, we might have been at it like slightly longer. So like Patricia's going to speak next. I know you're going to probably hear that recording, but you two should probably connect anyways. I just see so many parallels between what the federal government is doing, what the state of California is doing. And I'm happy to connect offline. Lori, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Come again. All right, so with that, let's move to state of California. So Patricia Kennedy, thanks for being with us. You're one of our regular members. You have a lot to talk about, I know, and you brought a friend.
I brought a couple friends. Yeah, I have a lot to talk about. I was hoping, I mean, even just with what Lori said, there were multiple things she said where I was like, ooh, we should connect on that. Ooh, we should connect on that. So if that connection would be great. I think most people here have heard me speak a couple times, but I'll give just a general overview of the climate team at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Some of the things we're offering. I have two updates that I kind of wanted to plug. And then I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Ben McMahon, who is leading our climate services team and kind of get in a little bit deeper into how to make climate data accessible for tribes. Because that's kind of the approach that we took to this. So I guess
you've got access to sharing your screen whenever you're ready.
Great. I have no slides, but I know Ben does. Really just kind of overview of some of the stuff that the climate team does at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research is a few different things. We have our grant programs currently developed, and this will expand to include extreme heat, but we have our adaptation planning grant, our regional resilient grant. I can send all of the links, Angie, to you if you would like to share those out. But it's really state funds that are looking to support both in the regional resilience, kind of a regional approach to resilience planning and implementation, and then the adaptation, I think it's, you know, in the name, but they both have tribal funding targets or tribal set-asides, and are working to make those programs really accessible to tribes. So working on it. Our extreme heat, who Braden is here, and I'll give him a minute to introduce himself probably at the end because I have to jump off early. But he has very new to the team. We're so excited to have him on. He's doing our extreme heat work. And I think he's going to plug a tribal listening session that's coming up. So Braden, you can put that in the chat and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a wildfire group, also a vacancy, so we're working to fill that role. And then our climate assessment team, which is what I'm doing, which is kind of all focused on research. And then our climate services team, which Ben is leading. So I'm going to touch on some updates with the climate assessment team. The climate assessments really, just as you would think, like the national assessment or the IPCC puts out an assessment, right? Kind of bringing data projections and an overall assessment of climate change in a certain geographic area, right? So this brings it a little bit more downscaled to make it meaningful for California, the California climate assessment. That means really providing that foundational data and information that planners, policymakers, what have you in California can use to implement programs moving forward, right? How we make that data accessible, I think, is something that Ben can speak to in a little bit. But I do we are grappling with some of the same things that Lori just said, right? So I'm managing the Tribal Research Program, which is a new program this time for the 5th assessment. And we're grappling with just that. We're grappling with how do we collaborate and partner with tribes to lift up tribal expertise and traditional knowledge in this process, but not doing so in an extractive way? How do we protect that knowledge in the process? And, you know, a lot of the pushback, just from my experience, I haven't seen it at OPR, but I know it exists from my previous experience. A lot of the pushback we get with tribal expertise and traditional knowledge is from Western science is kind of that pushback of how do you validate this knowledge, right? I get that asked a lot. Okay, this is great, but you need to validate it. So I think one of the things that I'm looking for in my program is to collaborate with tribes and how to educate, like how validation with traditional knowledge systems is sort of like infused in the methodology. So really trying to provide guidance to the state in how we see traditional knowledge systems. That's kind of one side of it. And then the other side is how are we protecting them? How are we lifting this up without being extractive? But I think extractive would probably be a nice way to say it, you know, from what's actually happened with tribal knowledge in the past. So we are doing some in-person meetings this summer. Angie, I'll be connecting with you on that. But part of it, and I think I see some folks here on this team that might be interested in that, but part of these meetings will be, they're all regional meetings for the 5th assessment. And the first part of those meetings will be connecting potential regional authors. So whether you work for a public health department or an NGO or a tribe, connecting all of those authors together in setting a stage for kind of what's to come with the assessment. And then the second part of that, we're looking to do like a tribal roundtable or listening session to hear more from tribes directly and on how they'd like to participate in the assessment. So would love all of your participation in those meetings. Connect with me. I'll be plugging that moving forward. But now what I'd like to do is actually hand it over to Ben so he can speak to, like I said, the assessment is producing downscaled climate projections and data, and in a really exciting capacity, right? I don't know all the details, Ben probably does, but one thing I've heard from my engagement with tribes thus far is, well, this is all great, but how do we actually use it on a day-to-day basis, right? Tribes are saying they're overwhelmed, they're under capacity. It's not that they don't have the knowledge to do this, but they don't have the time and capacity to handle these huge databases. So how do we make it meaningful for them? And that's where Ben comes into play, at least in this scenario. So if it's okay, I'm going to hand it over to Ben. If there's any questions for me specifically, I can answer them because I will have to hop off in about 5 minutes. Otherwise, Ben's very familiar with all of our programs and can handle it, I think.
Hope so, yeah. Do you want me to, yeah, I can just jump in. So share screen. Yeah, I just have 4 quick slides that'll help me organize my thoughts. And I'm just going to keep the PowerPoint open so I can use this. Yeah, so I wanted to just talk very briefly about the Climate Services Program and kind of one of the things we're working on, what the portfolio looks like, and how I think this connects to some plans that Patricia and I have been working on for some sustained engagement with the tribal advisory group, but also tribal groups more broadly, as we think through, what kind of data is out there, how does it get used, and how can we better optimize that process? And so I put this little data plus in the parentheses there. A lot of times climate services, if you haven't been familiar with that term before or haven't seen it, generally, it's this connecting climate science and data to the decision-making and planning. So how do we bridge this gap between the two? But a lot of times we talk about this, it's more than just data. A lot of times it's this like technical support capacity or providing support or user assessment to make sure that the data and tools are well understood or well received or actually match the needs or concerns of communities of interest. And so a lot of this is, it's more than just putting the data out there and saying, oh, we've made the service available and that's all we need to do. It's thinking, what's that next step that we need to take to better connect that data and better understand how it could be used more effectively. So in the ICARP climate services portfolio, there's three main things that we're focusing on. Some of these are in development. Some of these things are things that we'll be updating, and some of these things are will be revised in the coming years. So CalAdapt, a lot of the climate data that we're talking about with the 5th climate assessment, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But broadly speaking, we're trying to better understand are the tools that are connected to CalAdapt, what are the strengths and weaknesses of those tools, and how can we optimize or update or create new tools that take that data and make it more applicable or more usable or more approachable for a wider user base. For the Vulnerable Communities platform, it's really this, how do we identify communities we might want to work with, where we might want to prioritize adaptation investments, or from a technical assistance perspective, could the team or others kind of help provide some support on using some of these tools or engaging with questions to better understand that intersection between the climate risk, the social characteristics that affect that risk, and how that combination is really kind of a persistent issue. And then for the adaptation clearinghouse, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a clearinghouse of resources that really are designed at thinking through how you might adapt to climate change. There's a lot of policy support on there, also some good case studies that illustrate what this looks like in practice. But clearly there's more work we can do to, one, make it more accessible, but also to better elevate and uplift some of the work that's already been done in terms of using adaptation resources. So something that is already underway that I just want to highlight is a user needs assessment. We have an external contractor we're working with, a wonderful partner, Exegy, who's helping us think through what are some of the areas where we can improve some of these resources, and also what are some directions we can take it that will advance some of the goals we have, or will help do some of that work of expanding the network of users, or making the tools a little more useful, or just better understanding some of the needs that feed into it. And so on the goals side, from a content perspective, it's like, what are the existing resources we already have in place? How can we improve them? And are there some opportunities to develop new resources based on goals or things that we identify as part of that process? But I think another goal we've taken away from this is what I coded here as reach, which is more than just improving the resources. It's like, how do we better understand the network? How do we think about how we expand that network? And broadly speaking, doing this by increasing the relevance of those tools and resources and making sure they're connected to some of those key concerns. Some of the preliminary insights are that there's a lot of great content in place on these sites, but there's also some probably pain points in how they get used, or what kind of the workflow of using them are. So one of the preliminary insights that's come out of this process is for Exegy working with us to think through, how do we improve the user experience? And I called that the on-ramp here, but it's like, the front door, like when you land on the space, is it clear what it's trying to accomplish? Is there clear guidance on how to use it? Is it and streamlined in such a way that makes it relatively straightforward to use? And so how do we take all that content and make sure that the workflow is streamlined, and also provide a clear path to technical assistance? If someone wanted to reach out and get some guidance or some input, or provide some feedback on these resources, is there a clearer way to do that? And so that's led to us thinking through a set of updated goals, which is to imagine this as a more coherent portfolio of resources, to draw some connections between these different tools and resources. And that's informed by that ongoing user assessment and some prototype testing that we'll be doing a little bit later this summer. But something that we've also been thinking about, and this will extend to the last slide in thinking about tribal engagement, is how do we imagine a more sustained user engagement? We're doing this one-off in the sense of it's a 9-month contract or a 1-year contract, but it's a discrete period of time that we're doing this user engagement effort. But we recognize that the needs will evolve, and that there's a incredible value in having some sustained partnership and sustained input on what some of these tools and resources can look like. And so one of the things we've instructed Exegy to do is, coming out of this process, is to help put in place, or give as a deliverable, to give to us a set of resources that we can continue to use as part of this engagement. And so that takes us to the final slide and relates to some conversations I've been having with Patricia about how we might engage with the tribal advisory group as well as other tribal groups going forward, which is really thinking through how do we take that initial user needs assessment that Exegy has helped lead and that framework, and then think how do we adapt that or modify that or think through what does that mean as far as some more sustained tribal engagement around some of these tools. And these are not all of the questions that we think we should ask, but these are a couple key question clusters that are helping us shape our effort going forward. And we're definitely taking input on other questions we might ask or things that we're missing. But I think, as a first order, what are some of the data or resources that have been particularly useful? And then the other side of that is what questions or issues are not reflected in the existing data, so we can better document, not just how to better use the data, but what are some of the gaps in the data that's there. And then from an outcomes perspective, what are some of the goals for climate adaptation, those key decisions or questions that someone who's accessing these resources might want to answer? But then what are some of the barriers or challenges or hurdles that groups might face in using or accessing those data? And so I think those two kind of binaries or, two sides of the same coin, or however you want to think about that, are really helping us shape what we think that sustained process of engagement might look like. And so as a next step, I think we'll be taking a subset of some of these questions and ideas to the tribal advisory group to receive some input on what would it mean to engage with some of these questions and how could answers to that better inform development going forward as a sustained process, because the process of revising these tools is not something that's going to happen as a one-off either. So it makes a lot of sense to have this sustained engagement process. So with that, I will stop with questions, suggestions, feedback. I see Patricia's still here. I don't know if she has anything she wants to chime in on.
I think she might have just left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
ready to hop now. I'm here, but I'm ready to hop off. No, I think that's great, Ben. I'm just really looking forward to hearing how the conversation goes, and then also open to hearing those other questions I asked earlier about how do we protect tribal knowledge and kind of lift it up and elevate it in the same time. So I'm going to leave you with that, and then I'm going to hop, but looking forward to the hearing how it goes.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye, thanks, Patricia. And thanks, Ben. I think you might be my new best friend. We should talk a little bit more. Everything
Okay.
you're saying is stuff that we've been talking about with the Tribal Climate Health Project for a long time, and we would love to support you. The benefit is you have all the authority to actually make things happen. So I'm we would love to share our insights
Okay.
with you.
That's great.
On a lot of this stuff, if you're willing to take it, including things like we're supposed to be doing an assessment of our own this year with tribes, and so it'd be good to collaborate with you on that. We're asking the same kinds of questions around data needs, data gaps, what's missing, what do you use, what are your best practices, stuff like that. So it seems like it would make a lot of sense to somehow coordinate on that.
Absolutely.
And even the engagement piece, sustained engagement, I'd be interested in talking with you guys about it, sort of even a broader view. So I'm with you. I say that all the time. These one-offs are exhausting, even though they're important. But there's a lot of engagement fatigue. And so I'm working with multiple agencies, both for tribes and for local governments, to be like, what is an apparatus we can create that lasts, where we have these nodes around the state for regional engagement, plus the statewide level engagement, where all the agencies are working together, and the stakeholders on the ground are ready for this ongoing engagement that actually develops an accumulation of understanding over time, not just like hey, this whole reinvent the wheel every time. So I'd love to talk to you about that at some point too. But let me open it up for questions.
Can you throw that last slide up again, Ben, with your questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have all the answers for that, Osamu?
Yeah, yep, got them all. Just wanted to make sure that I was getting all the questions.
Got it.
I mean, I do think one thing that comes to mind is just that the data challenges of working with more of the kind of health outcomes as a metric for climate adaptation and tracking progress on whether or not you're actually at the end of the day, having results in terms of reduction of harmful health outcomes. I think there's everything from, data privacy concerns when you have these really small tribes, and it's really hard to anonymize, different health statistics, to just availability and coordination between different, say, tribal health clinics that have never been contacted before on this type of topic. So I think, many of them are not necessarily familiar with even like, what are the range of heat-related illnesses, and how would we report that out to the tribal government for purposes of adaptation planning? So I definitely think there's a lot to benefit from there by just taking some basic steps to, coordinate with your tribal health department or with your, whatever the local clinic is, to try to figure out if there are trends and kind of climate exacerbated health issues, and would love to see what that focus that we've been trying to take brought into the kind of the OPR focus as well. And so definitely would love to keep in the loop about how you're planning to do that or what you're looking into there.
Yeah, I think the public health piece is a really important piece of the climate, and I see it as a growth area for what I think the CalAdapt enterprise can see going forward. How we do that is challenging, but I think it's a really important piece. In my background, I was medical anthropology, which is public health adjacent, and so I have a little special place for that anyway. But I think it's a really important piece, thinking about the complexity of climate vulnerability going forward. So I appreciate that comment. Yeah.
Sama's work is really good in that he actually does something. And a lot of the rest of us are looking at things and reporting things. And I find it challenging to talk to tribes that are dealing with things right now. And then telling them that the benefit will be a report or a website, which is not helpful at all. So,
Ben, what are you seeing from in your line of work with respect to tribes in terms of key data gaps, or what are they asking for that you're not that somebody in the state is not already providing?
It's a really good question. I think that's part of I don't have the answer to that right now. I think that's part of why Patricia is encouraging us to start with the tribal advisory group, and then build out some of that sustained process so that we aren't missing some of that. I think, it's a really important question. The thing that Laura, you just said, as far as like that sustained question versus kind of the triage of the now, I think, a 50-year projection, one of the things we're grappling with, and this isn't unique to tribal issues, but certainly related to, as well as imagining, what does the risk look like 50 years from now when you're dealing with, the issues of the present. And so a 50-year climate projection isn't necessarily the most pressing concern. And so I think it's imagining what that looks like and how you balance that from the, managing the present versus managing future planning and not getting, well, yeah, I'll just stop there. But I think that's a really important consideration in terms of how we think about that priority wise.
There's like 3 buckets of data, right? It's like the long-term forecast, and then there's like what the Health and Human Services Office of Climate Equity, or whatever they're called, on the federal level. They are coming out with their climate outlook. That's like a 3-month projection. That's very relevant to communities trying to figure out something right now. And then there's the real time, today, what's my air quality today, whatever. That is not really a planning tool. That's an implementation tool. That's like send an alert to the community kind of tool.
Right. And the challenge being, and Ben, I see your hand up, the long-term data is harder to pin down in terms of specific impacts versus like a weather data. It's much easier to imagine what, a smoke plume from a wildfire or an extreme heat wave would have in terms of impact. So yeah, Ben, please.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ben. This is really fantastic. Just to kind of follow up on your point about the 50-year projections, that's something we've really struggled a lot with helping develop vulnerability and kind of hazard assessments go up for such long periods of time, because I worry we get caught in kind of what we call the farsightedness of, oh, that's so far out, I don't need to worry about it. But then we get these kind of surprises where something that was projected to not be a concern for 50 or 80 years happens this year, like the heat waves or some of the fire activity. And so I think it's a really important concept to kind of try to work into these ideas of, these are, climate projections, but all models are wrong and some are useful, and these things could happen tomorrow. And so how can we kind of think about using those extremes that may not be expected to occur for many, many, many years? What if those happen tomorrow? And how could you work in those kinds of ideas into your decision-making and your planning process? And that's something I hope we can all do together to kind of draw that forward, because I feel like we have largely gotten stuck in kind of, oh, that's in 2100. It's not a huge concern yet. And then all of a sudden what was projected to happen in 2087 happens this year.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all this.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, we've had some internal, not for official output, but talking about it in terms of now, soon, and eventually. And I think that eventually is the really hard one to think about, because the other two happen so much sooner, obviously. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a comment here in the chat about it looks like there are already some modes where state agencies are talking together. We're super happy to see that, and just want to, Ben, keep us in mind too. We're happy to play a role here. This group, or the Tribal Climate Health Project, and Paul Abandoned Mission Indians in general, sort of pretty active here. Happy to support and share our insights and some of the stuff we're working on. Is there anything else for Ben today? Well, that was useful. Is there any, Ben, is there any like next steps that this group could potentially partake in?
I think so. So one of the things we're doing for the Vulnerable Communities Platform outreach is thinking through what some of the networks that we would want to reach out to make sure we're having that broader reach, in terms of thinking through, an extension of this user needs assessment process, and thinking through what are some of the gaps that could help fill. And so I think, as that goes forward, I think that could be another touch point that could be a useful conversation, just to think through, what does that look like going forward, and how could we continue to inform that? So.
Well, great. We're happy to host you again for a longer feedback session if that's useful.
Yeah. We have a new engagement lead that started this month, or last month, I guess, end of April. So as she's getting up to speed, we have plans for a little bit more movement on that this summer. So yeah.
Well, great. I think I'll go ahead and wrap us up. This I'm just sharing because it's one of our slides we just have hovering around, and I can send this to you. This is like a super short summary of some of what we've learned. And some of what tribes are looking for. But I just mainly want to show next steps. So I think, Isabel, is there anything you wanted to say here? Do you want to, I think you dropped something in the chat.
She had Wi-Fi issues, but she dropped a really great Tableau dashboard.
Yeah, so Isabel in San Diego, San Diego County. I think we're going to have her speak probably in July and share the updates on what she's doing with tribal data for her community. That will be great. And then
I'm
are you there? Okay.
Angie, I have just a quick addition to that last slide that you showed. I don't know if it's helpful, but just in the drinking water quality, there was something that we've encountered recently with just aquifer water quality being really affected by the flooding in Tulare County, for example. The Tule River Tribe has seen some serious impacts from that, plus concerns about, well, how did the wildfire activity last year combined with this extreme flooding that they've seen this year? How might that put a really intense pressure on their what previously was a very scarce kind of aquifer, and now is more full, but also full of a lot of crud that is expensive to filter out. So I think just interesting to see these multiple kinds of climate effects overlapping, making one another worse and putting stress on our kind of key infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds like a Laura Walker kind of question too, something that often falls under their purview. Well, as always, we're interested in your ideas for future topics and speakers. Reach out to us if you have ideas or thoughts, and or if you come across something where there's an opportunity for us to provide any advising or comment to something that's in progress, we're happy to think through that. So we will then meet next July 12th, same bat time, same bat channel. And I want to say thanks again to Ben and our other speakers and all of you for joining for a good conversation today. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.